personal question. Should I talk about Abrome in like a past tense? It's like we definitely call it like a wrapped project. So when I'm talking about Abrome, should I say Abrome was? Is that sort of how you view it, or do you view it as still current? Let's say.
Yeah, I mean, technically we're still current,
Okay.
but it doesn't matter to me.
Okay, I'll maybe interchange.
I mean, the reality is that we're not accepting new people, and and so it's a project. Projects should be shut down when they're no longer meeting what the purpose was. Yeah.
Totally. Cool. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm gonna get into questions.
My name is Antonio Buehler. I'm 46 years old, and I was running Abrome, a self-directed education community in Austin, Texas, for the past 7 years. We also had a flying squad that operated out of it, and I shut it down this past summer, and now I'm a full-time stay-at-home dad trying to figure out what to do next. I got interested in self-directed education over a decade ago when I was looking at the education space more generally. I wasn't even interested in notions of youth autonomy. I actually got into it because I was looking for a company to buy. I was actually trying to buy a company to run it. And one of the things I decided to look into was education, because I've always enjoyed helping kids. And back then my mindset, this is like 2007, 2008. Back then my mindset was the best way to help kids is to make them school very well so that they can succeed in life. And so I started looking at curriculum providers to buy, and I knew I couldn't sell into the big school districts because that's dominated by the publishing houses, or at least it was back then. And so I figured I should sell into the homeschooling market. And so I went to a homeschooling conference, and at a homeschooling conference, all of a sudden I started hearing about unschooling. And I'm just like, well, this makes no sense. If we're trying to school kids to make them successful and to make money, then like unschooling blows that up. And so then I just started reading more about it, probably first through like John Holt or something. And then it's kind of just the rabbit hole. And all of a sudden you drill deep into it. And then the question is less about, well, how do you make these kids succeed at the game of school so they can succeed at the game of life, to, wait a second, these people are human beings, and maybe they should be making decisions that matter for themselves instead of just following whatever the adults say. And at some point, the balance just tipped. I was just like, hey, them being human beings with autonomy and an ability to make meaningful decisions in their lives is probably more important than my ability to school them better.
The earliest I can remember, first, second grade, I loved school. I enjoyed everything about it. I did really well. But later on, around third grade probably, started to get bullied and then lost a lot of the joy out of it. Grades just really went down even for elementary school. And then around fourth grade, it just became too much. And so I just dropped out middle of the year, and I moved in with my grandma and started being homeschooled by her. She used to be a fifth grade teacher, and so she already had a lot of knowledge on that. But that didn't end up working very well, since being homeschooled and taught by a parent is very, feels kind of prisonish in the way of you don't go out or do anything or interact with any other people. You kind of just sit in one place and you talk to one person for days at a time. And that was really bad, and she could tell. And so once Abrome opened, I went there, and it started out really, it didn't even know what it was really at the start. And it was kind of just everyone having fun playing games. And then as the years went on, we started to refine it and do more things. We started going on trips. We started going to museums and really working on projects and figuring out how to make our lives meaningful and how to learn as much as we can.
In 2016, I kind of had a decision to make. Do I look for opportunities and sort of keep looking around the country because I wasn't necessarily feeling fulfilled in Austin? Or do I just go ahead and try to create community for young people through self-directed education here in Austin when I could in the moment, because I had connections in terms of community and unschoolers who kind of knew what I was doing. And I decided that if I tried to pick up and move somewhere else, which I really wanted to do at the time, that it would take another 3 years to really be able to try to build something. So I decided to just go ahead and do it. And so I just told everyone I'm launching a self-directed education community called Abrome. And I didn't do very good marketing or anything. And we didn't have much time to open, but we opened with three children amongst 2 families. And there were 2 facilitators, so amazing ratio. And we just grew from there. And at the end of that first year, we had 5 kids. And then we just sort of grew every year. And the program definitely shifted and changed over time as our population changed and as the needs changed.
Can you talk sort of specifically about what you've been doing this year with Abrome and Antonio?
Yeah. So this year I've been doing one-on-one meetings around weekly, depending on how schedule works out. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. But during those meetings, what we'll do is we'll basically come to them with a few topics that I'll spend time at home working on. And so, for instance, we were working on financing, and last week we were working on financing. And so at home, I figured out all my finances and all that stuff. And then we worked together, sheeted it out, and figured out a plan. And then we've also had weeks where I worked on just preparing for interviews, for job interviews. And also I have a trip that I have to plan coming up. And basically I have to plan an 8-day trip away from home just by myself with the intent of learning something new or learning as much as I can. And the meetings have just been a way to learn something. It's been kind of talking about a few different subjects.
Why did you choose to start an ALC versus maybe a different model?
I didn't choose to start an ALC. I chose to start Abrome, which is going to be different than everything else. I didn't want to be tied to anything. I didn't want to be tied to an ideology. I didn't want to be tied to an old white guru who said something some time ago and everyone had to follow it. And I wanted to be able to adapt and evolve. When I was at graduate school, I took a sabbatical from Austin because I got into a lot of police accountability stuff, which resulted in me being targeted by the police. Arrested 6 times, and never convicted, but arrested 6 times. And they were actually sitting outside my house at one point. And so I took a 1-year sabbatical, went to grad school, got my ed degree, not because I needed it, more of a sabbatical reason. Also just a public signaling thing, hey, trust me with your kids because I now have a degree in education. So while I was at grad school, I met Peter Gray, and I asked him if he would serve as an advisor, and he agreed to. And when I was talking about starting up Abrome, he said, well, you should check out ALCs. It sounds very similar to what you're trying to do. And I registered it. I even contacted the ALCs and got the starter kit, but I didn't want it. My big fear with being part of any sort of network is all it takes is one person doing one thing and it's tied to you somehow. So I went 2 years without getting deep into an ALC. But then I went to an ALC training and I saw things about what they believed and what their values were how they tried to interact with the kids and how they tried to build community. And it was just something that kind of blew me away. And so it was actually 2 years into Abrome that I said, hey, we are now part of the ALC community.
So that would have been like around year 2 and 3. And the difference was now Antonio had the ability to get feedback from other people. And so we gained a little bit more structure because, as I said, the initial first year was spent a lot of the time. We didn't really know exactly what we wanted it to be. And so people would just be doing games and what they wanted to do, which is important. But around once it officially got a little bit more structure and became an agile learning facility, then we started to plan things out more and figure out how we can be more intentional with our time.
We definitely tried to use the agile tools as set forth by the ALC starter kit and by what we saw other ALCs doing and by what we saw in the trainings. The ALC tools that are listed aren't necessarily the same thing as agile tools in the programming world. There's things that they copied for sure. But one interesting thing about the ALC tools is that in the starter kit, they've laid out these are tools that ALCs use. They're completely optional. If they don't work, don't use them. Take what you need, leave what you don't. And ALC has been very explicit about that. And what I've seen is almost every new ALC tries to incorporate them all. And almost every ALC I've been to has let go of most of them, right? And I think it's a good organizing tool. I think by far the best thing is the community awareness board or community mastery board. People call it different things. And the check-in and change-up that helps inform that. I think that is by far the best thing in terms of the ALC tools. But yeah, I mean, we used them. We tried them. Some worked, some didn't.
What did a stereotypical day at Abrome look like?
Yeah, okay. So back in around the last year of Abrome, which I think is a good representation. So for me, I actually worked in the lab. So I worked for Abrome. And when we came back in, COVID was still something that we were actively caring about. And it was still a threat to the community. And so we actually did COVID testing on site. And so every morning, everyone would give me a swab, and then I'd take it in, and I would work in the lab, and I'd actually test everyone for COVID. We had this big equipment, and that was around the first hour or two of my day, depending on lab results, and that can vary. It could take up to 3 to 4 hours. But after that, it would typically, we'd be hungry, so we'd either go out and get lunch, or maybe we already brought something with us and we'd cook lunch. And then we'd typically have a meeting set up with one of the facilitators, and we'd meet about a subject. For instance, I know one of my classmates he really enjoyed bartending. And so he used to have a bunch of meetings just about learning more about drinks and getting a job in that environment and just prepping himself for that. And then I have another classmate who really enjoyed coding. He used to do interviews and just meetings and practice in the facility. And then that would typically take up a good few hours. On Tuesdays, as soon as I got out of COVID testing, we would go straight over to a different facility, and we had a name for it, but it was kind of just a joke name and I don't remember it. But it was basically this quiet learning place where everyone would just silently work on their projects for the rest of the day, and we'd have just 5 hours to just work on our projects. Me and 3 of my friends, every Tuesday we'd have 2 hours where we just practiced American Sign Language, and then we'd go off and we'd do our own projects. And then at 3 to 3:30, everyone would be headed home.
So when a family chooses self-directed education, oftentimes there is sort of a hangover of, am I not doing what's best for my kid? Is this something that's going to put them in harm's way in the future, whether it's, they can't survive because they can't get a certain job or something. And I think in a lot of ways, what they're doing seems so risky that they want to make sure that their kids never get hurt emotionally or physically. And we also live in a society where parents expect their kids never to get hurt, right? But I think it's kind of amplified for a lot of families who choose to send their kids to a self-directed education community. And so at Abrome, we certainly had when a child we had one family pull their kid out of Abrome immediately. One day when he was playing with another kid and they were chasing each other through the space, and the one kid tried to close the door behind them to create distance, and the other kid ended up running smack into the side of the door, which obviously hurt and definitely left a mark. But yeah, they pulled him immediately because he wasn't safe.
Yeah, the fact that, like, you know, you run into a door. I run into doors as a kid. Like, I don't know. Then you don't run into a door again. Like,
well, the thing is, if they ran into a door at home,
yeah,
the family would be like, "Oh, that stinks.
Yeah,
like, let me comfort you and, you know, figure out what happened so it doesn't happen again."
Yeah.
But as soon as it's like someone else, like, they're just like, "You suck."
Yeah.
So my personal view is that risky play is just a part of growing up, right? You're trying to understand what your boundaries are. You're trying to understand what your capabilities are. You're trying to understand how to interact with the world and other people. And play is one of the few ways where you can really push boundaries in order to learn, right? Like, if you put two kids into a ring and said, now we're going to test each other's limits, that would be completely oppressive and horrible. But risky play is just one of the best ways to understand yourself. And so that's kind of fundamental to, I think, anyone who wants to really embrace self-directed education. But for a lot of people, it's kind of out of bounds.
So to kind of discuss the, what would you call it, I guess, the detox from schooling, we had one specific person who came middle of their middle school experience. They were just incredibly depressed, and they discovered Abrome, and they came here. And for the first 6 months of Abrome, they just sat in the back closet on their computer, just playing video games with their friends. And a lot of people critiqued them for that, but Antonio was very much so just letting them do what they wanted to do. And 6 months in, I guess they got bored or curious about what was going on outside, and they came out and they blossomed so much afterwards. They never went back there. They've just been loving to learn and trying to learn as much as they can. And it's been great to see that big shift happen. It took a few months, but it happened, and they're a lot better now.
We had a lot of parents very afraid that their kids weren't going to be ready for some sort of academic outcome. And it didn't matter kind of how much I spoke to them and explained to them that nothing that they wanted for their kids was actually being taken away. Like, they literally, their kids could go to Harvard or Stanford if they wanted to. But the parents were constantly in fear that they were somehow missing out on something important that would allow that to happen.
What did you like most about Abrome?
Abrome was all about caring about the community, and it put just everyone's mental and physical health above them learning an immense amount. And I appreciate that the most, because in public school, there's this idea, specifically, actually a new recent idea that's come up, which is the idea they want to teach students 5,000 things, and they want them to be able to remember those 5,000 things by the end of their school year. And a whole school time is 15,000 hours. So that's one new subject every 3 hours. And that's insane, especially for their mental health. And I just really appreciated that Abrome was more about trying to just learn the few things that matter to you and making sure that you're doing good and that you're enjoying it.
slices bread at the grocery store, with her hair pulled back in a baseball cap. Boss says her shoes won't do, she's gonna have to get a new pair. He walked off the job today. No, he didn't say nothing to nobody, didn't even say goodbye to her, just took a smoke and never came back. But the floors aren't mopped and the shelves are bare. Time and a half